History of my oldest ancestors of whom I am very proud descend. January 5, 871. Alfred, the Great, King of Wessex, founder of England, my 36th grandfather, 8 times my grandfather, relevant character in the TV series, The Last Kingdom, is defeated, in the Battle of Reading, by Viking Prince, Haldano, son of the legendary King Ragnar Lodbrok, my 39th grandfather, 8 times my grandfather, relevant character from the TV series, Vikings. Alfred, the Great, King of Wessex, founder of England, was born in Berkshire, Wantage, in 849, and died on October 26, 899. He was the son of Ethelwulf, King of Wessex and Osberga, paternal grandson of Egbert, the Great, King of Wessex and Redburga of Francia, and maternal grandson of Oslico, Lord of the Isle of Wight. Alfred, the Great was King of Wessex, from 871 to 899, and King of the Anglo-Saxons from 886 to 899, and founder of England. Alfred defended his kingdom against the Vikings, and at the time of his death, he was the dominant ruler in England. He was one of 2 English kings granted the epithet the Great, the other, Canute, being the Great. The details of his life are known thanks to the Bishop of Sherborne, John Arcer, and a 10th century Welsh chronicler. Alfred's reputation is that of a cultured and merciful man, who encouraged education and improved the legal system and military structure of his kingdom. Infancy. Alfredo was born in the town of Wenating, currently Warnatag, Oxfordshire, being the youngest son of Ethelwulf, King of Wessex, and his first wife, Osberga. In 855, at the age of 4, Alfred is said to have been sent to Rome, where according to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, he was confirmed by Pope Leo IV who anointed him as king. Victorian writers interpreted this episode as an early coronation in preparation for his final succession to the throne of Wessex. However, this succession could not be predicted at the time because Alfredo had 3 living older brothers. A letter from Leo IV shows that Alfred was made consul. A misinterpretation of this investiture, whether deliberate or accidental, may explain this confusion. This interpretation may also be based on the fact that later, Alfred accompanied his father on a pilgrimage to Rome, where he spent time at the court of Charles the Bald, my 35th grandfather, 13 times my grandfather, of the Carolingian Empire, around 854 to 855. On his return from Rome in 856, Ethelwulf was deposed by his son Ethelbald. With civil war imminent, the kingdom's nobles came together in a council to reach an agreement. Ethelbald would retain the western county, traditional Wessex, and Ethelwulf would reign in the east. When King Ethelwulf died on January 13, 858, Wessex was divided between Alfred's 3 brothers, Ethelbald, Ethelbert and Ethelred, my 37th grandfather, 8 times my grandfather. Bishop Arcer tells the story of a child, Alfredo, who won a book of poetry as a prize, given by his mother who had given it to the first of her children to be able to memorize it. The legend also mentions that young Alfred spent time in Ireland looking for a cure for his illness. Alfredo was affected by health problems throughout his life, possibly Crohn's disease. Statues of Alfred in Winchester and Wantage portray him as a great warrior. Evidence suggests that he would not have been physically strong, and although not lacking in courage, he was known more for his intellect than his warlike character. Reign of Alfredo's brothers. During the short reigns of 2 of the 3 eldest brothers, Ethelbald, Ethelbert and Ethelred of Wessex, my 37th grandfather, 8 times my grandfather, Alfred is not mentioned. A Viking army that the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes as a great pagan army that landed east of the Kingdom of East Anglia with the intention of conquering the 4 kingdoms that constituted Anglo-Saxon England in 865, was the stage for Alfred's public life. Since 866, it was during this period that Bishop Arcer gives Alfred the unique secondary title Secundarius, which may indicate a position similar to that of Celtic Tanist, a recognized successor closely associated with the reigning monarch. It is possible that this agreement was sanctioned by Alfred's father, or by the Weta to guard against the danger of the succession being disputed if Ethelred of Wessex died in battle. Fight against the Viking invasion. In 868, Alfred fought alongside his brother Ethelred in an unsuccessful attempt to defeat the great heathen army, led by Evil the Boneless, outside the adjacent kingdom of Mercia. At the end of 870, the Vikings arrived in their homeland. The year that followed has been called the Year of Alfred's Battles. 9 battles were fought with different results, although the location and date of 2 of these battles are not recorded. In Berkshire, a successful skirmish at the Battle of Englefield on the 31st of December 870 was followed by a severe defeat at the Siege and Battle of Reading by Ivar's brother Haldano on the 5th of January 871. 4 days later, the Anglo-Saxons won a brilliant victory at the Battle of Ashdown on the Berkshire Downs, possibly near Compton or Aldworth. Alfred is particularly related to the success of this battle. Later, on January 22nd, the English were defeated at the Battle of Basing. They are defeated again on March 22nd, at the Battle of Merton. Ethelred dies shortly afterwards, on April 23rd. The King at War. Initial fights, defeat and escape. In April 871, less than a month after the Battle of Marton, King Ethelred dies, and Alfred succeeds him on the throne of Wessex and in the task of its defence, despite the fact that Ethelred is survived by 2 minor sons, Ethelelm and Ethelwold. This fact is in accordance with what was established between Ethelred and Alfred at the beginning of the year in an assembly in Swinbjorg. The brothers agreed that whichever of them survived the other would inherit the personal assets that King Ethelwulf left in his will to his children. The deceased children would receive only the properties and wealth their father had established and any additional land their uncle had acquired. The unstated premise was that the surviving brother would be king. Given the ongoing Viking invasion and the youth of his nephews, Alfred's succession was probably uncontested. While he was occupied with his brother's funeral ceremonies, the Vikings defeated the English army in his absence, at an unknown place, and once again in his presence, at Wilton, in the month of May. The defeat at Wilton crushed any remote hope of Alfred driving the invaders from his kingdom. Alfredo was forced to enter into a peace agreement, according to sources that do not reveal the terms of the peace. In fact, the Viking army withdrew from Reading in autumn 871 to take up winter quarters in Mercian, London. Although not mentioned by Arthur or the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, Alfred probably also paid for the Vikings to leave, as much as the Mercians would pay the following year. Finds dating back to the Viking occupation of London in 871 have been discovered in Croydon, Gravesend, and Waterloo Bridge. These findings suggest the cost involved in making peace with the Vikings. Over the next 5 years, the Vikings occupied other parts of England. In 876, under a new leader, Guthrum, the Vikings attacked and occupied Wareham in Dorset. Alfred blocked them, but was ineffective in recapturing Wareham by assault. In this way, he negotiated a peace that involved an exchange of hostages, and the Vikings swore under a sacred ring associated with the worship of the Norse god Thor. However, they broke this oath and, after killing all the hostages, fled under cover of night to Exeter in Devon. Alfred blockaded the Viking ships in Devon, and with a fleet destroyed by a storm, they were forced to submit and withdraw to Mercia. In January 878, the Vikings made another sudden attack on Chippenham, a royal fortress in which Alfred had been residing since Christmas. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, most of the people were murdered, except King Alfred, who with a small troop gathered by him, managed to flee through the woods and marsh, and after Easter he built a fortress in Athelney, and from that fortress he began to fight the enemy. From this fort of Athelney, on an island in the Somerset marshes, Alfred was able to mount an effective resistance movement, bringing together local militias from Somerset, Wiltshire and Hampshire. The year 870 was a low tide in the history of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. With all the other kingdoms fallen to the Vikings, Wessex alone continued to resist. Death, burial and fate of Alfredo's remains. Alfred died on October 26, 899. The cause is unknown, although he suffered throughout his life from a painful and unpleasant illness. His biographer Arthur gave a detailed description of Alfred's symptoms, and this allowed modern doctors to offer a possible diagnosis. It is believed he had Crohn's disease or a hemorrhoidal disease. His grandson, King Edrado, appears to have suffered from a similar illness. Alfred was originally buried in the Old Minster Cathedral, in Winchester, Anglo-Saxon cathedral of the Diocese of Wessex, perhaps built especially to receive his body. Later in 1110, the monks were transferred to Hyde Abbey and transported the body of the king and that of his wife, Elisvite, and children, presumably near the main altar. Soon after the dissolution of the abbey in 1539, during the reign of Henry VIII, the church was demolished, leaving the tombs intact. The royal tombs and many others were rediscovered by chance in 1788, when they were building a prison on the site. The prisoners dug the entire width of the altar area, and the tombs were stripped of all existing wealth, and the bones were scattered and lost. The prison was demolished between 1846 and 1850. Further excavations in 1866 and 1897 were inconclusive. Excavations carried out by the Winchester Museum Service in 1999 located a second well excavated in front of the site of the high altar, which was identified as dating from 1866, an excavation by amateur antique dealer John Mellor, who claimed they had been recovered. Several bones from the place he said belonged to Alfredo. These later came into the possession of the vicar of St. Bartholomew's Church. In March 2013, the Diocese of Winchester exhumed the bones from the tomb at St. Bartholomew's and placed them in a secure location. The diocese made no claim that they were Alfred's bones, but intended to protect them for further analysis, and from the attention of people whose interest may have been provoked by the recent identification of the remains of King Richard III. The bones were later dated using the radiocarbon dating method, but the results showed that they were from 1300 and therefore unrelated to Alfred. However, it was announced in January 2014 that a pelvis fragment discovered in the 1999 excavations at the Hyde site, which had later come to rest in the storage room of a Winchester museum, had been dated to the correct period. It is believed that this bone could belong to Alfredo or his son, Eduardo, but this theory has not yet been proven. Religion and culture? In the 880s, at the same time that Alfred influenced his nobles to build and equip the Burhs, Old English fortification, perhaps inspired by the example that Charlemagne, almost a century earlier, set. This entailed the recruitment of scholars from the clergy of Mercia, Wales, and abroad in order to increase the value of the court and episcopate, the creation of a court school to educate their own children, the children of the nobles, and the intellectually promising boys from lower birth conditions, an attempt to require literacy in those who held positions of authority, a series of translations into the vernacular from Latin, which the king is said to have considered most necessary for all men to know, the compilation of a chronicle detailing the rise of Alfred's kingdom and of the house, with a genealogy that extended back to Adam, thus giving the West Saxon kings a biblical ancestry. Viking raids had been particularly damaging to monasteries, although Alfred founded monasteries at Athelney and Shaftesbury, the first new monastic houses in Wessex since the beginning of the 8th century. According to Arcer, Alfred attracted foreign monks to England to his monastery at Athelney due to little interest among locals in taking up monastic life. Alfred carried out no systematic reform of ecclesiastical institutions or religious practices in Wessex. For him, the key to the kingdom's spiritual rebirth was to appoint pious bishops and abbots, learning, and trust. As king, he saw himself as responsible for both the material and spiritual well-being of his subjects. Secular and spiritual authority were not distinct categories for Alfredo. Alfred was equally wise, distributing the translation of Gregory's Great Pastoral to his bishops so that they could better function and supervise the priests, and using the same bishops as royal officials and judges. Family and descent. In 868, Alfred married Elesvita, my 36th grandmother, 8 times my grandmother, daughter of a Mercian nobleman, Ethelred du Musil, Lord of Gainey. Gainey was probably a tribal group of the Mercians. Elesvita's mother, Edbura, was a member of the Mercian royal family. They had 5 children, including Edward, the elder, who succeeded his father as king, Ethelfleda, who would become Lady of Mercia in her own right, and Ilfrida, who married Count Baldwin II of Flanders. Alfred's mother was Osburga, daughter of Oslac, Lord of the Isle of Wight, Chief Steward of England. Arcer, in his A Life of Alfred, states that this demonstrates that his lineage comes from the Jutes of the Isle of Wight. However, this is unlikely because Bede, a writer from the 7th and 8th centuries, tells us that they were all murdered by the Saxons under the command of Caedwalla. In 2008, the skeleton of Queen Edith, granddaughter of Alfred the Great, was found in Magdeburg Cathedral, Saxony-Anhalt, Germany. It was confirmed in 2010 that these remains belonged to her, one of the first members of the English royal family. The children of King Alfred and Elesvita, my 36th grandmother, 8 times my grandmother, were Ethelfleda, married in 889, to Ethelredo, Lord of Mercia. Edward, my 35th grandfather, 7 times my grandfather, nicknamed the Elder, succeeded his father as King of Wessex, married to Ilfleda. Etelgiva, Abbess of Shaftesbury. Etelvardo. Ilfrida, my 35th grandmother, 7 times my grandmother, married to Baldwin II, the Bald, Count of Flanders.